Okay, I'll just get a quick introduction. I'm running around talking to people. We heard this morning that it takes a village. I thought I was have to explain to you that innovation is not coming up with a clever idea. Innovation is configuring and compiling a whole bunch of clever ideas into an actual usable, commercializable product. That's the innovation. Invention is sitting around coming up with clever ideas. But innovation takes a community, does take a village. And that we've known that for years and years and years in regular innovation. The problem with pharmaceuticals is that innovation takes a village of villages of villages. It's a very complicated, actually a very complex set of networks. And that is new to innovation management. But any of the other straightforward stuff, we have books and books. I've even written books and articles on all of these issues. So it's not that we don't know how to do regular innovation, but we're not real sure how to apply all of that information to pharmaceuticals because of the complexity. The people you need to get in touch with are spread around the world. So we have a panel here, and we're looking at this challenge of converging innovation, converging technologies, and I think we heard from everybody that they didn't have a little piece of stuff. They had something that fit into a whole flow, a whole network, and it was that whole network that had value. The separate pieces have no value. So if you're selling a piece, that's why no one's giving you any money. You have to connect it, you have to build up, and these co-evolve. So of course that's the problem. So we have these funder people who are very clever of seeing where are things going, what's co-evolving, where are things connecting, and how might these pieces come together. So their challenge is try to tell us from their perspective, how do they see the convergence happening? How do you see the co-evolution, the innovation, which is literally pulling the system together? How do you see those sorts of things come together? So I'm just going to go in order. I'm going to ask Christy Shaffer. Each of our people will just briefly introduce themselves and talk a little bit, just a little bit about what they do. It won't be a big talk. There are no slides or anything. We do have a quickie little video because we want to have a lot of discussion. Okay. So remember, you're not allowed to ask, how can you give me money? The question is, what is it that you guys think is worth financing, and how do you do that? So, Christy, if you would mind.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm a receptor pharmacologist by training, and joined industry right out of a postdoc at UNC, Burroughs Wellcome Company. And I went into clinical research because I really love the idea of how you take basic research and translate it into clinical medicine. That was really exciting to me. And at Wellcome, I was able to work on a number of projects that ultimately got through the clinic, and some got approved, and that was very exciting. And then I joined a company called Inspire, which was out of UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine, and became the first employee, and ultimately became the CEO and took the company public, grew it to about 200 people. And then I started doing work on innovation. And so I worked with Chancellor Thorpe at UNC, and we went to MIT, Stanford, University of Florida, University of Utah, and looked for models of innovation, and came back and wrote an innovation roadmap for UNC. And we have actually increased the number of companies being out of UNC from 2 or 3 a year to about 12 to 15 a year over the last couple of years by finding best practices. Along the way, I became part of a venture team, Hatteras Venture Partners, so I'm a partner there now. I manage what's called Hatteras Discovery, which is the very early part of the fund. So we invest in companies that have an idea. There may be very little, if any, preclinical data, and usually the companies are about 2 or 3 years from an IND. So we are risk takers, and we hope that the preclinical data will come along quickly and we can move it on into the clinic as rapidly as possible. We've done that now about 8 times with the little portfolio that we started a couple of years ago. So I'm a big believer in innovation and trying to take things quickly to answer questions and to get the accelerated yeses and the rapid nos when possible.
Hi, my name's Mary Musacchia, and my road to innovation has really come mostly through just a passion for seeing things that are new. My training is as an attorney, and I spent many years at SAS Institute. I was a general counsel there, etc. And round about 2000, I joined an organization called CED. And I realized my passion continued to grow for CED, as the Council for Entrepreneurial Development, and stayed working with that organization. I now keep my office out at First Flight Venture Center. It is an incubator. It's one of the oldest in the country. It's very stable. We tend to run at First Flight. It's a science-based incubator, 35 to 40 companies at any given time. We have 16 wet labs now, about 25,000 square feet under the roof. We have one experiment that's going out in the yard. The companies that come into First Flight, because we're a science-based incubator, they tend to be pre-revenue. They're beyond what I call ideation. They are really intending to, and we look for these qualities in these companies, ones that intend to not be a lifestyle, that they're going to go and they want to be commercialized. They are traditionally making something. So we have med device companies, we have diagnostic companies. So all of these companies have a very strong grounding in hard science, and not to dismiss applications for your iPhone, but those aren't the companies that sit at First Flight. One of the things that I always say about the First Flight companies is that when they reach us, they have many, many needs, and we try as a science-based incubator to put some things around them that are important to have. One of them is community. So one of the things that, if I was looking at a science-based incubator, what do you do to bring people together? Every Thursday we have a happy hour. Why? We want to have cross-collaboration among the various companies there. To build a company, you need as many ideas and as much help as you can get. We look to see, can we bring educational programs to them? So, like many places, but we have a lunch and learn, and we try to focus on areas of interest to those types of companies in that incubator. We have executives in residence. The idea is that you try to bring in people that have been, like a Christie, that have been there, done that, and now how can they help guide somebody through the process? Two of our great successes right now is we have 2 EIRs that were such a good fit with 2 of the companies. They've now become fractional CEOs. They've opened up their Rolodex, and they're helping to match them up with other strategic possible investors and collaborators. So we sort of fill a gamut of services that we put around as an incubator, those little chickens that have just come in. They're still chicks. And so what I'm going to do, and if you can back there, Luke, roll the video. It's the next slide. But this will talk about the companies that are there and how they experience and what the value is they got out of First Flight. Can you do it? Or oh, there you go.
You know, in the industry, more than 90% of all startups fail. What we try to do here is avoid the common pitfalls. We like to tell people we can't tell you what you need to do to be successful, but we can tell you thousands of things not to do. First Flight is a high science, high impact incubator where we focus on companies that are solving really interesting real world problems. So we focus on things that have hard science behind them. It's an underrepresented part of the entrepreneurial community, but we think it's one that's extremely well suited to Research Triangle Park.
We started the company in 2012. We moved into First Flight Venture Center July of 2012, so this was pretty early on. And this is where we've been developing our technology and really made this company possible.
Glaucoma is a disease that causes blindness. What we do at Camrys Vision is we have an implantable device that will regulate the pressure in the eye to stop that progression of blindness in every patient. So we've been at First Flight Venture Center for about 3 years. Through the network here, we've been able to be connected to our CEO. Also, the great benefit besides the network here at First Flight is that they provide facilities to allow us to perform the laboratory work needed at a lower cost.
So when we came to First Flight, we had very little money. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just had this dream. And so Andy and a few of the folks that were here really helped us grow, helped us understand what we need to accomplish from a milestone perspective so that we can add to our company and move on and graduate.
We found ourselves in First Flight as a way to start to build the team. Several years later, after we sold Advanced Liquid Logic and we started the next company, we came back to First Flight again. It's a very adaptive environment here because there are so many life science companies. We all have the same problems, but not all of us have the same capabilities. And so we can always fit what we need as entrepreneurs with something that's offered here.
The wealth of biotechnology resources that are within walking distance to us is unbelievable. We have the Hamner Institute right next door. Another good example is RTI being right next door.
We've actually been working quite a lot with them to help us with some of the demonstrations that we need to do and to help us basically be able to meet some of the testing requirements that we needed. We weren't able to do that without RTI.
Utilizing the RTP network, we've been able to work in terms of different facilities to conduct our preclinical testing, as well as it's just a community with a lot of people with great experience and knowledge to share to further develop our product.
It's an ecosystem that an entrepreneur needs to make a company successful. So it's First Flight, it's CED, it's the Biotech Center. First Flight's a key part of that ecosystem.
We've seen quite a few companies, over 285 companies come through here throughout the life of the program. When they exit from First Flight, that's not the end of the road. That's really the beginning of the journey for them of being on their own.
It's a great space. We love First Flight, and they've been extremely helpful over the last few years. But hopefully we can grow to be kind of standing on our own and graduate from First Flight.
To get these kind of companies done in 3 to 5 years and get them to the point where they can be freestanding requires outside effort as well as inside effort. And typically a single 1 to 3 person team doesn't have all the expertise themselves to pull that off. What we want to do is provide a support environment where they can go solve incredibly complex real-world problems. I mean, these are things that are going to change many, many people's lives.
Okay, well, thank you. That was a nice video. And our third panelist, Jay, will briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll start peppering them with questions.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Joanne to invite me for this panel. What we do, basically, I'm actually the president and founder of a company called Innovate Biopharmaceuticals, but it's beyond what Innovate is all about. It was a company that I started, but it all started with somewhere between what Christy does and what Mary does. It's a next step over. We identify technologies that need to be commercialized or go beyond that proof of concept that has been done in Christie's companies or at an incubator and take them to the next level. So we have 2 pharmaceutical companies, and right now we are working with 3 software companies, some of them in the medical space, actually 4 of them. We already commercialized 1 software, so totally 7 entities that we have commercialized over the last 5 years. The idea is to take an innovation to the next level. Initially, when Joanne had sent out the program, she used the word convergence of technologies. And I've been in the industry for over 25 years and started as a process engineer, being a chemical engineer initially, and eventually graduated into and joined the darker forces of sales and marketing and then business development. I've seen every aspect and challenges that we see in commercializing the product. It was, I think, 1999. I was moving to RTP area and interviewed with GFK at that point. And my job interview was for a position for innovation. And I asked the gentleman, how do you define innovation? He said, innovation is nothing that is too sexy or creative. It is something that makes things happen right. Okay? And he gave an example of innovation was to make the product much more efficiently and much more efficaciously. And that's what it was. It's basically very simple in many ways. I think one of the examples of what innovation takes is, it takes a village and different technologies to make the product happen. The days of alchemy and apothecary are over, and there's no more compounding. It's much more complex molecules out there, much more challenges. In 1987, Amgen was pretty much bankrupt, and Johnson & Johnson had a chance to buy Amgen for $20 million. And the then chairman of Amgen said, of Johnson & Johnson said, well, there's no hope for biologics, let alone erythropoietin. Okay? Erythropoietin happens to be over a $20 billion drug today. Okay? And biologics itself are over close to $100 billion in sales globally. So I guess he was wrong at that time. But then came Kirin, a beer company out of Japan, and created a joint venture to the technology that Kirin had developed and made erythropoietin a successful product. So innovation is about bringing the right stuff at the right time together to make it happen.
Okay, well, thank you. I'd like to, if anybody have any questions, I have lots of questions, but if anybody have any particular questions you want to ask, pose to the panel, or do you want me to start? How about if I start then? Okay. So let's start with Barry, but let's talk. You said you looked at a bunch of like 8 projects now that you've funded. What made those special, worth funding?
So let me step back.
I'm sorry, Christy.
Yes,
Yeah.
So let me start back and say that we look at, on an annual basis, about 400 companies a year, 400 ideas or companies a year, and we're only going to fund a couple a year. So obviously the odds are low that we're going to fund something. The companies that we funded were ones that had really interesting and innovative technology that could solve a real-world problem. And I'll just give you 2 examples. And they also had generally good teams, although sometimes we have to help be part of the team. And so we'll do it both ways. So in the first case, there was a team that had already come together in Georgia. It was technology from Georgia Tech, from the biomedical engineering department, and from the medical school at Emory. So the 2 of those schools were working together on a microneedle technology to be placed in a space in the eye that was the first time it was going to be done in the clinic, called the suprachoroidal space, a very fine microneedle to go in your eye, in the sclera, and treat back of the eye diseases. Now, you may know that about 8 million patients now get intravitreal injections. So stick a needle in your eye is actually doable, and but people don't like it, as you can imagine. So the needle that they had was very tiny, barely even perceptible to the human eye, and it could place it in such a specific place that it prevented a lot of the side effects that can happen with an intravitreal injection, specifically when giving steroids in the back of the eye. And so it would prevent cataract formation, it would prevent increases in intraocular pressure and the development of glaucoma with a steroid that could treat the disease, but then the side effects were worse than the cure. And so we had no idea if this was really going to work. We took a big bet, but the team was very passionate. I think that's one thing we look for. They had good intellectual property. That does matter in terms of your patent position. And they had a plan that was very clear about how to take it in the clinic. Now, one thing I want to say about it, because it relates to the prior speaker, is they had done quite a bit of preclinical work over the course of about 2 years in academia. And we thought we had this perfect microneedle to go into the human eye because we had done many pig eyes and human cadaver eyes. In fact, I had done it. It was that easy. Okay. But when we got into the first human trial, it wasn't the same. When you have a human living eye and someone awake and you're putting this microneedle in, we found that there were some problems associated with getting through the conjunctiva. It was squishy and things moved around, and the physicians couldn't tell when they were in this magic space, the suprachoroidal space. So we had to go back and reinvent the needle after the first clinical trial several times. The team apparently liked Seinfeld, so the first needle was called Kramer, and the second one was called the Newman. And I was waiting for the Elaine, but the Newman worked. And so the good news is that we are now in phase 3 clinical development with this needle that all the investigators, over 40 now, love, and it's great. But things took longer and things cost more than you ever predict. And I think you have to find investors who know that this is hard, that have done this before, and know that there'll be iterations along the way. But we certainly look for passion. We look for a plan that can get, with some amount of money that's defined, can get us to turn that next card over, to either get a no or to figure out what to do to turn the no into a yes, or to get a yes as soon as possible. So this company, which we funded in 2012, starting with a $4 million investment, is now valued at about $93 million. We're expecting a potential exit next year, and that's pretty fast in our space. That doesn't always happen, but I think they were really good that when they had the problem, they told us immediately. They didn't dismiss these clinical investigators, say, well, that person doesn't know how to inject. They saw it as an issue. They dealt with it. They went and talked to all the sites, and they figured out, getting feedback from the clinical investigators, how to make the better system.
Yeah, so really, it's problem solving.
Yeah.
That's a very important, jumping into, it's easy to say all those guys are idiots. That's
Right.
the regular product innovation, the customers don't like your product. Sometimes people, what's wrong with these customers? That's not going to work. So, Mary, do you have a similar kind of story of because you're in there?
Yeah.
Do you actually look for business models, or do you help them do the plan, or?
All of the above. What we look for, and I think you probably heard some common themes during the video that touched on points I made, but that we look for companies where there is a plan. We look for companies that are not going to be lifestyle. And the other thing is, when you're trying to say, and when I say a plan, it's not a business plan. That's one part of it. It's a plan of development. A favorite phrase that I have is one that's out of Winston Churchill, which is, no matter how beautiful the strategy, sometimes it's good to take a look at the results. And I think a lot of times there is, for these startups, we work with them very hard to say, give us a progress report. How are you doing? Are you still moving along that plan that you had developed for design? Many of our companies are before Christie's team would look at them. I mean, they are probably a little bit earlier than they might look, some of them. And so those stories, when you look at Camera's Vision, the glaucoma case, she's now into her second iteration of the stent. It's a medical device that will go up under the eyelid, but she's in her second iteration of the stent. Base Trace, the young woman that was talking, they've got part of the outdoor experiment, and what they started in was looking at the industry. They were looking at the fracking industry. They learned a lot about what they didn't know very, very rapidly, and they're now moving into a different energy space. Same technology, but into a different market space, and evolving their technology to fit that market. And the story I'll tell you about that is, they were looking at a tracer that was going to go into the various fluids that you're going to dump into the ground and see where it went, okay? And the simplest thing, that had they had certain types of people early with them, they would have said, why would any company want to know that their fluids went and contaminated a well, a half a mile away? They were never going to get into that industry, because nobody wants to know this unless they're forced or have it forced down their throat. That seems intuitively obvious to people in business, but it's a shift all of a sudden, because then you went to a more experienced, more developed industry sector where the world is already caring about what happens, so to speak, downstream with some of your effluent and other things. So again, there are a lot of reasons why there are shifts that happen within a company, and we're always there at First Flight to sort of help you go through it, find people that can help you see your way through that, and sometimes just hold your hand when you're going, why don't they love me? It's all over the place. Does that?
Yeah, that's good. Jay, similar comments. What makes something look good?
I think the technology has to have its own merit. It should be commercially viable. I think, as stated earlier, commercial viability is a key factor. You can manufacture a product, but is it commercially still viable? I think often that is lost in the pharmaceutical industry. There's a local company that is no longer there, unfortunately, was making an HIV drug, and the commercials for that drug were just outrageous, as a result of which it's no longer there. I think the commercial viability is one thing that I look at it first. The team ensures that it is a viable entity. IP is, I think, right there with it, because we are a little later with, so somebody's already validated the IP. So, at the end of the day, we are open to working with others and trying to find, alternatives to what we may have already in-licensed or may have created. And finally, the inventor has to be flexible enough and receptive enough to any changes that may happen during the next stages of the product development.
Let me add on to that. I can't, from what we see, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for that inventor, that founder, to have that flexibility, because when they go and they talk to somebody that may want to put some money in, an investor, that investor is going to have a whole series of questions, and that ability for the founder to say, I can be the chief science officer, I don't have to be the CEO, I can be the operations person, I don't need to be this person. That movement, you saw that Lucinda Cameras with Cameras Vision, she started out, it was her company, her IP, her idea, but as she said, they helped us find the CEO. She was flexible enough to say, I don't have to be that person. I can be something else, which is really the brilliant researcher, grant writer, surgeon that she is.
Christine, anything else you want to add to that, or the comments that you had? What makes something look good, or we can go on?
No, I mean, I think all the comments have been right on.
Any other questions on that sort of thing? My next question is, it's about complexity. You've already touched on it. When I taught entrepreneurship, I found the book called Getting to Plan B, which means the idea of the book was always that your plan A is not going to work. And you have to be ready to be flexible to do all of that. And these were regular business models. But I think with anything in biopharma, either device or certainly drug, it's not going to work. I think, Christy, you already said, everyone already said you have to shift markets, and you have to be able to shift away. How about, you've already touched on it too, but how about surprises? Any stunning surprises, and how did you deal with them?
Well, I have another example. Actually, some were good surprises and some weren't. So, and with the same company. So, G1 Therapeutics, which spun out of the Lineberger Cancer Center at UNC, we got involved from the beginning. We started with a really small amount of money, $600,000, coupled with their NIH grants. They had a couple $1 million of grants to get them off the ground, and they had some really interesting ideas, but they really didn't have it in drug discovery development mode. It was more academic, getting ready to write a next grant. They were living off of SBIR grants, which are great. They're wonderful, non-dilutive financing, but it takes a while to get them and to write them, and sometimes there's multiple cycles. And so the surprise, I think, was that in contrast to the 11% where you can't reproduce the data, 100% of their data was reproducible, which was really impressive and surprising. And what was even more surprising that when we finally got in the clinic, which was last year, and we're now in phase 2 small cell lung cancer study, everything that the inventor, who's Ned Sharpless, who runs the Lineberger Cancer Center at UNC, everything that he predicted and everything, all the studies that we had in animals and in cells were right. That's highly unusual and surprising in a very good way. And so the company is doing extremely well. We'll present a lot of their data at ASCO. Now, the one other surprise we had in the other direction was the same molecule that we were developing in this first indication in an IV form, we thought would also be orally bioavailable, and it was. But what we didn't know was that when given orally for another indication, it caused some significant side effects that were absolutely not predicted in any animal model that we had been in. And so we had to step back and realize that molecule wasn't going to work for a second indication. We now have a different molecule that we're using for the second indication, which resulted in about a 6 to 9 month delay, which actually isn't bad. So we had a good surprise, and then we had a bad surprise. Another example, though, of a team that they called us immediately when this effect occurred, and they immediately put a SWAT team together to figure it out, and they figured it out in a couple of months, and then they were getting things back on track. But I can't remember a time in clinical development that the preclinical data so nicely mirrored what we would see in the clinic for at least the first compound for the first indication.
Okay, so the original plan worked. That was a big surprise.
That was a big surprise. But then the second plan, which was the same compound in a different form for a different indication, wasn't so good. So we had to have a plan B for the second compound. And I will say this, that most investors like to have more than one shot on goal. So if you have a platform technology and you can develop one molecule for a couple of indications, or you have a couple of molecules, we like that better because we know one may not work.
Any other people? Not, yeah, here we go. The audience has to give you. You're eating too many sugars. You're falling.
How do you deal with a company that has a good idea? They've developed a product. They've gone a certain distance towards having a product maybe that's ready for market, has no sales history, no revenue, or maybe a little bit of revenue. How do you deal with valuation?
It's low.
That's a given.
That's a given.
What's your formula? Do you have one, or just?
I think the real answer is probably no. There is no magic formula. What I think we tend to use is we have comparables within our own portfolio of companies that we have invested in that stage of development. Nothing that we invest in generally has revenues, a few exceptions. Almost everything is not even in the clinic, so really early. So the valuations are relatively low. Our job is to rapidly accelerate to value creation, taking a big bet and doing that. But I would say we use comparables. Also, usually you pull together often a syndicate of investors, and they'll have their list of comparables, and you'll come together to find something that seems to work. And what I've told entrepreneurs, because look, I've been one and still am one, and what I've explained is that you can't get too hung up on valuation in the early days of a company, because if you do, I've said this many times, 100% of nothing is still nothing. So sure, you can keep it all, but most important, can you find that group of investors that are really going to help you build value? Because having, 70% of something that's really valuable is way better than having 100% of something that's nothing. So I think what you have to do as an academic scientist or as a company that's forming is try to align yourself with people that, number one, believe in what you're doing, think that it's important, maybe have experience in the area, can really help you, and will not abandon you when there's times of trouble. Will try to help you solve problems if they're solvable.
Other questions? Go ahead.
As an academic faculty member with an idea and a potential product, how do I approach a means to follow the route that I have to get it into the marketplace? For funding, there are institutions like yours that provide funding. There are others that will push me aside, or the developers aside, and then it's going to fail anyway. How do you avoid being killed in the process of gaining funding?
So what university are you with?
East Carolina University.
Okay, in Greenville. Okay, so one of the things that we do, and we have done this many times, and I do it a lot, particularly with people at UNC and to some extent Duke, because they're right here in our backyard, but you're not that far away, is that I have on numerous occasions met with people that I know it's way too early, but I am willing to listen over coffee to the idea. And in fact, I met with Lucinda many times at Cameras Vision, and I'm so glad to see that she's moving it along.
She's doing great.
I'm really happy. And so we'll spend time. Sometimes we spend a year or two in advance with an inventor to talk about how to move it along without killing you, just saying, here's what we would do, here's what we'd be looking for. And if you can go out and figure out how to do some of that, we'll make connections for you. When you come back the next year, sometimes we invest. And we've done that on at least 2 occasions that I can think of. It's okay to be really early and say, look, I don't really know all the answers. I've just got this really great idea. Will you listen to me tell you about it? And make sure you patent it first. I had one person come and want to tell me a bunch of things, and I said, have you patented this idea? And they said no, and I said, I'm not going to talk with you about anything that's proprietary. Go patent it immediately, and here's a good patent attorney, and come back. So I think that what is the therapeutic area that it's in?
Same as Botox.
Okay. So it's in the, okay. So
It's way better than Botox.
I got it.
And you can't believe that nobody's giving them money.
Yeah, I got it. So, we know people who have been at Allergan, that would know a lot about this. So what we try to do is make connections for people, whether we decide to invest or not, because our goal as a North Carolina venture fund and a Southeast venture fund is to every company or person we talk to give them some grain of truth that might be helpful so that we can build an even better ecosystem here. So I'm happy to talk with you at some point. It's not my area of expertise, I'll say that, but there might be some people we can connect you with that can help you further the concept, and maybe Jay can help you.
No,
Any comments?
so apart from having the patent, make sure that you work with your tech transfer office. I think we do not want to make sure we step your if you're so yeah, just make sure, because we don't want to step on any toes there, and it has to be a fluid transition from your hands to a company, and but there are few options for a product like that. It's U.S. because of there's a practice of medicine laws which across from the U.S. shows, which allows for easier clinical data. So if you can find somebody to fund it, it'll be easier to do some clinical trials at US.
I think one thing that we see at First Flight is when people come, a lot of times their question is, I'm trying to get somebody to fund me. And that's probably in many instances, and Christy pretty well given you a discussion around that, that's the wrong starting question. And so it is figuring out your pathway and getting yourself far enough along to do that. We view, in the phrase that we use at First Flight, is we talk about if you come into our facility, if it's something that we think would fit and we can help you. If we can't help you, there's no point in being there. We look to de-risk a company so that by the time you're talking to somebody like a Christie about actual funding or other angel investors, we have pulled out as many of the problems and helped you pull out as many of the problems as possible, getting good teams in place, all of those things that we can possibly help you with. The other thing is that I think that it's important as an early stage company to have focus, because you will go from plan A to plan B, but to define your plan A, what is it? I mean, again, people smarter in this room will have a better understanding when you say it's like Botox. I'm sitting there going, well, okay, is it for the original health effect that Botox was being designed for, or is it for something that if I was at L'Oreal I might care about? And so, again, it is that very honed in direction of this is the problem that I want to solve, because now you can look at the market and say, well, does anybody else care about my problem? And that's the part, I go back to the one example I gave where they thought they were going to solve a problem in one industry, and for sheer lack of experience, they didn't understand that that industry wasn't going to be interested in their solution to their problem, because the industry didn't want the problem solved, didn't even see it as a problem. And so you have to really hone in on that part of it. The other thing, the only comment I make about valuation is there's no right answer other than Don't ask your friends that just graduated with their MBA from Wharton or Duke or whatever to give you and help you with evaluation, because they have really profound advice with that degree sitting behind them, and they aren't even remotely close, because they're telling you as their good friend, hi, this idea is worth $5 million, and the rest of everybody that's investors are going, maybe 750, maybe $1 million if it's a good day. So as you talk to people, as you're putting together some of your plans, and I'm thinking of one case in particular, very bright, brilliant young people, and I'm sure their friends that just got their MBAs from a very fine school were brilliant, but they weren't experienced. And so pick your advisors and get many of them and pick them well.
You need a plan, you need advisors, and the focus is very important. That's just basic innovation management. What you have is, as I said to you privately, you have a solution, but nobody wants solutions. We want problems to be solved, and all of you talked about what you look for. Is it really important to the world? And you have to make a story about why it can't be obvious, because it's not going to be. So it has to. I mean, you said that, Mary, and also you, Christy. Are they really solving real world problems? And you too, right? Yeah.
We only taking things which are real world problems right now. So.
You're only dealing out of the world problems. That's maybe.
So.
Other questions? Other issues you want to raise about funding, starting up?
I just want to address the valuation issue.
Please do.
A simple way of it depends what size the company is and what sales are. Easy, simple matrix. If you find an investor who is ready to invest, but the valuation is not right for you or for them, either way, everybody wants the best valuation on both sides of the table. Do a convertible note with certain milestones that attach to it that will actually trigger the actual valuation. There are third-party entities who will do valuation, but they will charge you tens of thousands of dollars to do that. It's not worth it at that early stage.
But, I may have asked that question, and I asked it the wrong way. It's not really where you start, it's where you end up with. That's really the truth. So it doesn't matter exactly how much money. It's sort of what percent do you give at each stage, and where's the valuation going to be at the end? Because 1% of a $1 billion company, I'm sure you say this all the time, is better than 99% of a $50,000 company. So how does the person coming to you, they have their own ideas, and I guess can you sort of give them an idea for this type of a company? So based on my experience, if you're successful, here's where the valuation may end up down the road. Because I hear about companies that get bought for billions of dollars with ideas that don't seem to be proprietary. They just wrote a program, they caught on, they have good sales, and their valuation jumps up, as opposed to maybe a unique product where nobody else can copy it. I mean, all these things have to go into your equation of how you do this, right? I mean, it's not simple.
Right. Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. So with G1, we actually had a lot of conversations about valuation because it was very early. They did not have a molecule yet. They were doing chemistry, so it was really early. But they had a really cool concept, which is now playing out in the clinic. And so they started with, they thought their valuation should be $7 million. And the reason was not illogical. They said, we have received $7 million in NIH grant money. So we have to be at least worth that. Well, that's non-dilutive financing. The NIH gives a lot of money. I mean, and that doesn't really factor into our equation. So, at the end of the day, we, negotiated. Now, and it was not even close to $7 million. What I will say is the founder, the two founders actually, one out of UNC, one out of Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, they are very happy right now because the company is worth a lot more than that, almost $80 million, and they're going to do very well. And they're mostly excited because they are going to help these patients, and their idea worked. And so that motivates them, I think, more than anything else. And so whether they own 5%, 20%, or 30% is kind of irrelevant to them at this point. They are just on cloud nine about the success of the project.
a similar story on the opposite side of the spectrum is I was recently evaluating the proposal. About $90 million had gone all the way through phase 2, multiple phase 2s, and they were looking for a buyout of the asset, not even a license, a straight buyout. Simple math, $90 million has gone into it. It's worth $90 million. Well, if nobody buys out, what happens to the company? Well, they have to shut down the doors. So it will be easier for me to buy that entity, let them file a Chapter 11, and I go and buy the asset off the auction block, right? So eventually it was negotiated down to $500,000 with a lot of backloaded payments. But the reality is that you have to be realistic about it. What happens then if you don't have the money? So if you have an entity which has sales, but you're not going to be able to grow it, you have to be open to give it up. I think there was a course at UNC Chapel Hill, Dan Rose, Don Rose, he taught, and he basically taught entrepreneurs, basically academicians who are converting themselves, their lives into being entrepreneurs, that at the end of the day, the maximum equity you'll ever own, maximum, is between 10 to 12%. So, and that is also on the higher side.
The other thing I would say that we're starting a new program right now at First Flight in order to help companies be in the best possible position in the de-risking, and Chrissy's already mentioned it, the grant funding, to the extent that you don't want to become a grant mill, but grant funding is non-dilutive dollars. And if you can bring that in to take you further down your pathway before you start asking for money, you will have a better chance of increasing your valuation. You'll have a better chance of being de-risked. You'll have a better chance of being more attractive to investors. And so those grant dollars that are now being allocated and required, all federal agencies, I think it's a certain percentage of their R&D budget or their budget as a whole, must go into commercializing grant dollars. You know, you saw Rich West in the video here. He funded Advanced Liquid Logic primarily, if not wholly, on grants. He's doing the same thing with some of the money that he made out of the sale of Advanced Liquid Logic to fund babies and going back with grants. So as you're thinking about how you want to bootstrap your startup, don't forget the granting and its foundations and its governments. And you're not looking at the NIH basic research dollars. You're looking for the ones that are for the commercialization, the SBIRs.
Right. I'll make a number of comments about this as well. We love it when companies have SBIR grants because we do feel it is validating. G1, for example, had a fast track award from the NCI, and those are really hard to get, and that was impressive. They asked us before we actually invested, back to your point, before we even invested in the company, we were still talking to them. They asked whether we would write a letter of support saying that we were looking very closely at the company and that we liked the technology, and we did that, and that helped them get the grant. And I've done that at least 5 other times with companies that actually some of them we've never invested in, but we thought it was a good technology. It just wasn't for us at the time, and that helped them get a grant. So grants are very important, and we like that. I also want to mention serial entrepreneurs. So you mentioned Rich West. Rich has done a fantastic job with Advanced Liquid Logic. It was sold, very nice exit, and then he started babies. And my guess is he'll start a 3rd company. Ned Sharpless, who we invested in with G1, he has 2 more companies, one of which we're looking at right now. So we love to reinvest in people who've done well the first go around. So you have several shots to own a part of a company that could be successful.
Would it be helpful, let's say you have somebody who has a great idea, you agree that it's a great idea, they may be ultimately a CTO or somebody else now, and should they try to link up with a serial entrepreneur or somebody who's built other companies, now you have a package of those 2 people, is that a more compelling argument for something you should think about doing?
I think it depends on the person, but I think generally, yes, that would be really helpful. If somebody linked up with Rich West, that would be real positive because he's had successful exits and people have a lot of respect for him. In some cases at Hatteras, we've had to step in and be the CEO. So I was actually the executive chair, essentially the CEO of G1 for the first 18 months. It was supposed to be 9 months. It turned into 18 months. We were then able to raise $12.5 million, and we brought in an absolutely superb CEO, Mark Valeka, who had started a company before out of Yale that had been acquired by Gilead. And so he had the track record, and he moved here from Washington, D.C. to become the CEO of the company. And so I think linking with anybody that's had the experience before, and especially more than once, is a great idea, because they'll, as you heard from the video, they're going to tell you a lot of things not to do. And sometimes that's as important as what to do.
I think the other thing I would say in that regard is, as you're building out your team, however you label them, one of the things that I think is really important to look at is not just the been there, done that, because I think that's, if you can get somebody like that to be an advisor, there's a reason why they're advisory boards, you know, that's one. But the other thing is somebody with a Rolodex that comes out of the industry. What I see is the desire to have strategics lined up early. As you're going in the science-based companies, the road is longer. There's a lot of, frequently there's regulatory hurdles to get over, so the road's longer. The capital costs at the front end are higher. You know, it doesn't cost the same to write an application for software as it does to create a molecule. And so you've got those elements.
And the disasters are bigger.
The disasters are bigger if you ever get to that. You may have a no sooner than a disaster, but I think that the trick in there is also, if there are strategics in your early marketing plan, if you can say, I want to partner with Johnson & Johnson. It may be a road to get there, but you then start looking for people that can help you get there because you've identified them as a key strategic. And so that's also part of the plan. Doesn't always work out, but finding people to be around with Rolodexes is a good thing.
Joanne has a comment or a question.
One question, sir. Are you in academia or are you in industry already? Both. Okay. So, you know, I've seen examples of individuals and inventors who have actually stayed in academia and basically would rather be an advisor on the scientific advisory board of a company and do sponsored research, you know, rather than be even a CTO. And that sometimes even, and sometimes they come out of it and they decide to be on the CTO or just on the scientific advisory board. And with pharmaceutical companies, that's much more easier to do and with less conflicts of interest.
Does anyone want to beat him up, or is it okay?
If you do get, this is a great idea, if you do get somebody on the advisory board, what are they looking for in terms of information? How does that work, or could be understood?
It's all over the place, you know. I mean, it's equity, dollars, combination of both.
But I'll tell you, I can think of one young company. It was a company of one. This young man had great courage. He left his job. He had his passion, and he had a plan and everything. And he left his job, and he came into my office one day, and he said, how much should I pay somebody to be on an advisory board? And he was talking about a gentleman who was on the faculty down at the university in Florida. And I said, my experience with most scientists and researchers is they love to talk about their work. You may well find he'll be happy to talk with you without anything. No equity, no options, no money. I said the first rule for a startup is take everything you can free until somebody says, you got to pay me. And so, particularly when you're dealing with people in the world of academics, a lot of times their greatest satisfaction is going to be to just help. And it doesn't mean that's always the case. So it's frequently options, it's frequently some money, but on advisory boards it's more options, I think, from my experience. But always go free.
Joanne.
So first of all, I hope everybody sees that these are nice people. These are people who will answer your questions with respect. You know, and I think it's frightening to try to figure out where is the front door. These people are the front door, so don't be shy about connecting up with them. But I would like to ask a question and bring back to sort of the initial question of the panel, and all these examples you've been giving are great, but I'd just love to hear from each of you a situation in which we all get it, that a lot of problem solving will include money. That's we'll stipulate to that. But can you talk about a situation where you faced a technological challenge, and Jay, this may be mostly for you because you're a little more on the front lines. You've been working with a number of different companies that you're running yourself, but to think about, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about reaching out, crossing lines, and so on. And can you give us, each of us, any examples of involvement you've had where the problem was a technology problem, and how you worked out that issue itself, the technology piece of it?
I think anybody who believes that they can live in isolation or a silo today and make the pharmaceutical drug, I think they are in a fool's paradise. Convergence today, as you use the word convergence, is a result of divergence in thought process. You have to have different thought processes that actually help you build a product. And without that, you're nowhere. I think every drug that is produced today or commercialized today comes from different ideas, different technologies. As a lab scientist or an innovator, you have identified a molecule, but that molecule is not yet ready. You need a person who can help you do the animal studies. You need an analytical chemist who can help you actually analyze it and make a method so you can analyze the drug. You will need a protein chemist to hopefully synthesize it, or a organic chemist to further synthesize it. There's so you will need these different individuals, either in the academic setting or outside, to bring these ideas together. Now you have a drug, and now the issue is drug delivery. You assume it will be orally available, but you do not. So you have to find an excipient. So you have to go to a pharmaceutics person who can help you do that. So it is a range of players that you need. It's a team, a village. But I think the innovator or the inventor has to be ready to hand over, which is very difficult at times in the academic setting.
I really appreciate the complexity of that balance. And so I'm not a scientist, I'm a fan of scientists. And I've talked to many people, and every time someone says they've left the bench to go to the business side, it breaks my heart, because it takes a long time to get there. It's a huge investment for yourself to get to that creative moment, and to constantly also be open to developing the relationships and the understanding of how the business works, and how drug development works, and how FDA works, and how all these different entities works, and finding people to work with together. I think it's not an easy thing to do. And the personality that fights their way through to become a great scientist is not necessarily the personality to develop all those relationships.
I just want to say, to solve a technical problem, you need all those relationships. So it's hard to take your question out of the context of all of this, because we already had technical problems where you took it to another marketplace, or you changed things you found. So it's not, usually technical problems don't sit by themselves, although obviously the molecule won't synthesize or whatever, they're glitches. I think the single largest cause for innovation failure from the old days before I started studying pharmaceuticals was the failure to meet customer needs. That's the number one failure, and I'm hearing that still is the number one failure, in the sense of you gotta find the marketplace that goes with, you have a solution. I said before, technology is the solution, the users are the people who have the problem. Your challenge as an innovator is to match those. You can't just say, it's not my job, I'm just a scientist. You have to look all the way down, I think.
So I'm going to give a completely different kind of example, and this one is, I think, fascinating. And it really speaks to, you've got to really want to do it and be passionate and resilient and persistent. So when I was at Wellcome, I was involved with a product opportunity that was being developed. It was a compound being developed for primary pulmonary hypertension. So you may not know what that disease is, but when you're diagnosed with it, you're going to typically die within about 5 years, or that was the diagnosis at the time. And it was one of those projects that was really hard for a whole bunch of different reasons. It was a rare disease. It was orphan. In those days, nobody cared about orphan diseases. Most big companies wouldn't even pursue an orphan disease. Today, it's all the rage, but at the time, it wasn't. And I remember being project leader and going into research committee and the chemist saying, this is a horrible project. It has a 26-step synthesis, and one is explosive. Okay? So it just was one of those things where nobody wanted to deal with it. Well, when Glaxo bought Burroughs Wellcome, they, of course, killed this project because it was complex, right? And it was for a little tiny orphan disease nobody cared about. And so there were scientists at Wellcome who had worked on it and who said, we'd like to buy that and give it to us for not much money. And they got it from Glaxo for virtually very little money, very, very little money. There was a woman who had a daughter with primary pulmonary hypertension, and she was a billionaire, and she said, I'm going to fund this. I'm going to help you start this company. This company's right down the street. It's called United Therapeutics. It now has about 800 employees here in the park. That product that nobody wanted to touch, that had a 26-step synthesis, it no longer has a 26-step synthesis. And they saw the explosion issue, which I heard later was overblown anyway. But the bottom line, it's nearly $1 billion product, and primary pulmonary hypertension has become a much bigger market. It's a multi-billion-dollar market. There were way more patients than anyone ever contemplated. But for that company, United Therapeutics, it was the passion of Martine Rothblatt and the passion of the team that had worked on it at Wellcome. And it was survival of the company. They had to solve the problem to get it to the patient. And so, did it really? I did not know that.
When they first left, they came over and they started, not the same name, but they started at First Flight when they left.
Okay, well, great.
And Jay's their president.
It's a small world.
Yes, no, I think we're over time, so we have one.
She's had her hand up.
Yes, please.
The value of SBIRs and STTRs came up. On November 18th, here in Cary, the Small Business Technology and Development Center and NC State are co-sponsoring a all-day workshop where they're going to have NIH people to run these programs. They're available to talk to you on a first-come, first-served interview basis and a lot of information kinds of talks for the day if you're interested.
Okay, what day is that again? November
18th.
November 18th, so look that up.
I think we might have some flyers on the registration desk for that.
Okay, Joanne?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam, very much.
Thank you.